Alright, so just a disclaimer before we start the video. This is not meant to be like a high quality addition to Varsity Gaming's video. I'm not going to show any of the examples, I'm just going to have random gameplay footage in the background. Just so you know, this is not meant to be like a high quality addition to it. It's just me essentially talking as if it's an extra comment, because these are some important notes that aren't mentioned. Now, just so that we're all on the same page, what this video is not me like talking about the video in like a different way. I'm not saying that anything he said here was wrong. I am just adding on to it. So the preface is that you are supposed to watch the old video first, right? This is not meant to be a standalone video. You're supposed to watch Varsity Gaming's video first, and then watch this video just so you have knowledge of, like, extra knowledge, essentially. Although, I guess you don't necessarily need to, but that's the intention. Anyways, let's get right into it, because I don't want to spend too much time here. Now, something he doesn't mention when he's talking about the claymores. Another big use for the claymores is having them set underneath windows. So, for example, if you're playing on Cafe Dostoevsky, you have the two windows that go onto the balcony. You can set down your claymores there, and any defender that's trying to jump out and kill you from that angle will have to look down and look at the specific claymore and shoot it while they're jumping over the window, and that can be very difficult sometimes. Or you can do the reverse, where you have a defender that's trying to go back inside the objective after they've already jumped out, and they're trying to get back inside the building so they're not detected anymore. But they have to now either walk into the claymore because they don't see it, or they're going to have to take the time and shoot it by looking at the ground, which will give you the opportunity to kill them while they're distracted, and it'll buy you just a few extra seconds, presumably. Another good use for the claymore that he hasn't really mentioned is, especially when you're in the middle of taking the objective, very often defenders won't, especially if you're taking the objective for a secure area, or you've planted the bomb and they have very little time, or you are securing the hostage and you're trying to get out of the room. Very often defenders won't think about these kind of things. They're just going to rush and, try and get to the objective as fast as possible. So they might not even consider claymores to be a possibility, and then that'll trick them just like that. Another good use for claymores is through the smoke, where you throw down your smoke and you place down a claymore on the other side of the smoke, and then if they try and run through the smoke, there's no way they can see it and they'll get killed by it immediately. This is especially useful during a Caveira interrogation. You can place down your claymore and your smoke, which is especially useful if you're Capital, because he has both his smoke micro pellets and his claymore. So you can place it down, and then if there's an interrogation, they'll just run after you, but they'll just run right into the claymore. Another kind of useful thing, but not really as useful, which you might have seen a number of times before, is having the Nomad Claymore combo. Unfortunately, as of the most recent Wind Bastion update, Burnt Horizon update, Nomad no longer has claymores, so you're going to have to work with somebody else in order to do this. But if you have claymores, and you place down an air jab in a specific direction, she can knock the defender into a claymore. Although this isn't necessarily useful unless if you are playing against an aggressively good team, that every time they jump over a window, for example, they're going to look down and shoot down the claymore before they hit the ground. If you have defenders that are like that good about destroying claymores, you can instead have an air jab next to it, which is incredibly hard to hit, even impossible from some specific angles. You just cannot hit it because you can't look far enough to the right or far enough above or whatever. And you can have the air jab knock them into the claymore. Of course, they can shoot the claymore, but once again, it might be hard to see because of, the walls or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of smart setups that you can do for this that are especially helpful when you're trying to defend. Also, I can say that especially if you're playing on plane, you're going to want to have attackers with claymores almost all the time, because you're going to have people running out all the time trying to kill you while you're glass on the plane. So having as many angles as possible to have a claymore there to watch it, because often people are too focused on trying to kill you while you're on the plane, they won't be focused on any claymores that might be any doorways. So that's a pretty good example of just setting up claymores in a specific way. Like I said, everything else he said was accurate, so it's not like he said anything wrong about that, so you can still use his advice for that. So now, moving on to smoke grenades. One of the major things about smoke grenades that he didn't mention is that they're extremely useful for when you're playing, and I use them all the time for playing as Dokebi, because you can throw down the smoke grenade, and you can go in for the hack, which is extremely useful. Another pretty good use for the smoke grenade is for Gridlock, because she can throw down smoke grenades, and she can throw down her tracks, and the attackers won't be able to see the tracks underneath them, so they're just going to walk right into it, and it'll be far more effective than, not doing so. Now, I mean, he recommends he recommends smoke grenades for every operator, and they all have their uses, because, for example, you could use smoke grenade to get extra cover while you're, scanning for, you're looking for footprints to scan with the Inox. So, all the smoke grenades are definitely one of the better options to go for. I just wanted to mention the Dokebi scan, especially useful. You gotta use it for the Dokebi scan. Okay, so next up, flashbangs. Like he said, pretty much the best use for them is to destroy ADSs, because you get 3 of them, and they're pretty inconsistent, so that's something to keep in mind, is that you won't always even get kills, or get people flashed, and it rarely ends up in a kill anyways. Unlike Ying's Candelas, you can look away from them, and they will have no effect. So, I guess in that sense, another decent way is to run in immediately after. It depends on what level of skill you're playing, but if you're playing against like a relatively high level of skill, or anybody who knows that if you look away from flashbangs that they'll do less damage, you can throw the flashbang in, and instead of waiting for the flash effect to go off, you can have somebody go immediately in, and while they're trying to turn away so that they don't get flashed, you can catch them off guard and kill them. I don't have any examples of this, but it has happened to me a few times before. And just keep that in mind. It is a possibility that while you're turning around to avoid the flashbang effect, you could be having someone rush you and kill you. Next up is frag grenades. One of the major things he didn't mention about frag grenades is that they're really useful for blowing up stuff from underneath. Now, you have to be really great about timing. Like, I'm talking really good about timing, because you're trying to blow something from underneath. So, for example, say if you're playing on border, you can throw the grenade from, and, like, there's a bandit shock wire on a reinforced wall that's above you. You can throw the grenade up onto the ceiling above you, and it could destroy the shock wires from underneath. That's incredibly useful. Also, just in general, if there's a lot of like gadgets inside, they can be pretty decent for destroying a bunch of gadgets. Obviously, not as good as EMPs, but they're not too bad about destroying gadgets. Although that's not the primary use, and they often get destroyed from ADSs anyways. But that's something to kind of keep in mind. Another good use for frag grenades is if you don't have a nomad or anything like that, you can toss in a frag grenade, and it'll pretty much prevent anyone from trying to bandit trick. For example, if you are in like Chalet, you can, while somebody's setting up the thermite, this isn't really relevant anymore because we have operators that do the same thing but better, but back in the day, you would have like a thermite trying to breach the Chalet garage door, which is reinforced all the time. But instead of having bandits sitting there trying to bandit trick them and prevent them from coming inside, you can have a frag grenade come in, and that will slow him down or down him a lot of the time. It's not all the time, it depends on the way you throw it and whatnot. But frag grenades are pretty effective in stopping people from trying to bandit trick. Another really fun thing that I like to use for frag grenades that isn't necessarily tactically effective, but I just love using it all the time, is throwing frag grenades through the vents on some of the maps. Now, some of the maps in the game have vents on the roof that you can toss grenades through, and they can drop down and kill people. And anytime I'm on any of these maps, I always run with frag grenades, because you never know, I could get a kill. Now, the maps that I remember having them, and I'm pretty sure these are the only maps, but please correct me if I'm wrong, are Chalet, Favela, Coastline, and Outback. I'm pretty sure those are the only maps with vents on the roof that you can throw grenades through. But like I said, if there are any extras, please let me know because I would love to try out new grenade spots. Another somewhat decent frag grenade use that isn't relative to multiplayer is if you're playing Terrorist Hunt, they're really effective for getting rid of barbed wire and nitro cells. If you have a bunch of nitro cells all over the place, then you can toss a frag grenade. It does a pretty decent job of destroying a lot of the nitro cells, or you can throw it in a bunch of barbed wire and it'll usually destroy and weaken a lot of the barbed wire, so you can instant punch them and they're a lot less annoying. Once again, only related to Terrorist Hunt, but it's still a use nonetheless. And I'm surprised that he didn't mention that with frag grenades, you can also throw them up at an angle so that it's physically impossible for somebody to see you, but you can still throw them out at an angle and kill somebody who's either hiding behind something, or you can use it to flush enemies out of a corner so they don't necessarily have to even kill somebody. You can just throw a grenade in a corner, and obviously they're going to have to haul ass, and even if they get out of there, they're not in that corner anymore. So it's very effective for flushing people out of the corners, unless if there's, of course, ADSs there sitting there destroying the whole thing. Now, those are all the uses for frag grenades. Obviously, I recommend using frag grenades for every operator because they are so good, and you really should be using them because they're so rare, too. They only are used by 3 operators, and obviously, just like Varsity, I use them for every operator I can. Last but not least, breaching charges. Now, I am actually a huge fan of breaching charges. I use them for a lot of the operators, unlike Varsity, who only uses it for fuse. I use them for a lot of operators, and I'll explain the reason why and which operators and all that good stuff. Now, I don't use them for Ash or Zofia because they already have a gadget that does soft breaching capabilities. So I don't use it for those 2 operators because they already fulfill that role for soft breaching capabilities. I do not use it for Gridlock and Jackal because they have smoke grenades, which I think is more useful, and they both have secondary shotguns that can fulfill a lot of the same roles that you would need, that you might instead use from a breach charges. So, for example, breach charges, they can break open hatches, so can their secondary shotguns. They can make holes in walls, they can destroy studs in the walls, so can their secondary shotguns. So I don't use it for those operators. For all of the other operators, I do use it. And the number one reason why I use it is because I play a lot of solo games by myself without a team. If you're not talking to your team, which is especially relevant if you're like me and you're playing on console. If you're playing on console and you don't have a team and you want to be as effective as you can be as a solo player, breach intruders are the way to go because there is no communication. You can't tell your teammates what you want them to do and where you want them to do it. So if you're reliant on other teammates to destroy your stuff. Now, once again, if you're in like the diamond level play, or if you're just playing ranked and you have a full squad, obviously this doesn't matter because you can tell your teammates what you want them to do and where you want them to do it. But keep in mind, if you are not playing with a team and you're playing with randoms, especially if you're playing on console and there's no texting options, unlike in PC, breaching charges are kind of a necessity if you want to do what you want to do. And honestly, I just generally use breaching charges even for just the idea of, like, even if I have a full team communicating in ranked and whatnot, I still use breaching charges just for the idea that we can make a lot of damage, and if one person dies, say we only have 1 or 2 soft breachers, we can still facilitate that very necessary role that other, attacking operators wouldn't necessarily be able to fulfill. For example, breaking open a lot of holes in the ceiling of an objective so you can shoot through it. Very useful tactic that I use all the time. And if I say if my soft breachers are all dead or I'm just by myself, I can facilitate that role by myself, and I don't necessarily need to rely on other players. So if you are playing by yourself, breaching charges I absolutely have to recommend because they can do a lot of the soft destruction. Unless if of course you're playing one of those operators that have the soft breaching capabilities, as I've mentioned before. One operator I absolutely will not recommend it for, though, is Finka, and that is because she has frag grenades, and frag grenades are a must for Finka because frag grenades are so rare and they're extremely useful. I think that's pretty much it for all of the gadgets, right? Yeah, I believe that's it for all of the gadgets. One thing I will mention, though, is that, if you're gonna use a breach charge for Habana, which I do, it's not the most necessary thing in the world, and mostly because she has her X-Kairos. Now, personally, like I said, I like being able to do stuff by myself. Say if there's an unreinforced hatch, I can break it down with my breaching charges, and I don't have to worry about using my X-Kairos on an unreinforced wall, and all this stuff. So, using X-Kairos can do a lot of the same things. So, I will say for Habana, it's a very clear choice depending on, like, whether you do or want to. I mean, these are all choices. You can do whatever you want. I'm not saying you should play one way or the other, as far as recommendation goes. But with Habana, she has the X-Kairos that do a lot of the same thing. It's just obviously those are limited and they could be more useful than destroying soft destruction walls like the breaching charges do, so keep that in mind. And obviously for Fuse, as he mentioned, I use them in much of the same way, breaking it down and then using the Fuse, but I also do the same thing for Ying. I place down a breach charge, and I think he mentioned this, but still, it's important to point this out. I place down a breach charge, I put down a Candela, and as soon as the Candela goes off, I blow open the wall or the barricade that I put the Candela on, and I rush in and kill people who are disoriented. So, I'm surprised that he uses it for Fuse and not Ying, but it might just be because of the other options. But anyways, that's all I needed to add onto the video. This video ended up being a lot longer than I was hoping. I was hoping it would be super short. It ended up being half as long, more than half as long as his video. Don't know how I'm going to edit this down. But anyways, thanks for staying with us. I think that this or this should block that. I think that's going to have to be a process. And that's fine. I'm totally fine with that. No. This is super simple. This is super simple. Super duper simple. Super simple. I was about to think it's super complicated. It's not. It's super duper simple.